Welcome to Kaleidoscope. Let's talk.
To say that 2023 was topsy-turvy would be an understatement. Lots have happened, but what's to be expected for a country coming out of near bankruptcy? We are going to take a short recap of 2023, the good, bad and the ugly, and also take a look at the crystal ball for 2024 with our resident public policy advocate, Rohan Pethiyagoda, who we managed to catch up while he was in San Francisco in the USA. Welcome and compliments of the season. If you look back, what's the good, bad and the ugly of 2023?
On the good side, I think compared to 2022, we have a much better social, political and economic level of stability. I think the thing that characterizes 2023 as opposed to 2022 are those three features. And that's been good for all of us. It's been good for employment, for government service, for economic efficiency and for the private sector. On the bad side, I think the problem is that the government has been behaving like a night watchman in cricket, like they're just playing not to get out. So it's been very much business as usual, inefficient, unimaginative. Just look at what happened, Savithri, to the GCE, A-level and O-level exams, delayed by more than a year. It's taken them almost 6 months just to correct the papers. This, suggests that a government has no will to get a job done. And the hundreds of thousands of students who are losing valuable years from their lives is incalculable. I mean, the damage done to these kids is crazy. And it spills over into the university admission system and the university output. So this idea that the government really doesn't have a purpose to it, that it's just messing about and lashing out in any direction, is, I think, widely now embedded in the consciousness of the country. Just look at what happened to the World Cup, the World Rugby Council blacklisting Sri Lanka, ICC blacklisting Sri Lanka, all because of what? Because of political interference. So the new broom that Ranil Wickremesinghe was supposed to have brought in last year actually didn't materialize. It's very much been the same sort of government as we saw from 2005 onwards.
So we began 2023 on the back foot, so to speak. How far have we come since then?
Well, as I said, stability is the main thing. So we've come a long way as far as stability is concerned. And the very difficult bets that Nandalal Veerasinghe placed last year as central bank governor, that by shrinking the economy, we could get inflation under control, paid off. He was very unpopular at the time, 1 year ago, but now we can see that year on year, inflation, which was running at 100% last year, at least food inflation, which is what matters to most of us, is now down to something less than, it's almost deflationary in the past 12 months. In the past 12 months, food prices have held steady. And even overall economic inflation, what so-called headline inflation, last year 60%, this year down to 5%. A year ago, in a newspaper interview, Indrajit Kumaraswamy, the former governor, said that he expected by Christmas this year inflation to be under 10%. I thought that was such an outrageous claim that I cut out the newspaper cutting and kept it. And I was wrong, because actually Sri Lanka performed even better than he had hoped for. Even as far as exchange rates are concerned, we've got much better performance than we could have hoped. The dollar went to 360 rupees and then came down to 330. And it's held steady for a good long time. Lending rates, for their part, they've also come down. So we've seen some really good economic performance over this year. And I think we should be grateful for that.
In the process of concentrating on getting the economy back on track, what has fallen between the cracks?
So the elephant in the room in this economic reform has been privatization. It failed. The president made several announcements that he's going to privatize Sri Lanka Telecom and Lanka hospitals. They're the low-hanging fruit, if you like, because they could easily have been listed on the stock market. He appointed Suresh Shah, a very effective leader for this campaign, did really good work to prepare these entities for listing, and then the government lost its nerve. So privatization fell through the cracks. At the same time, at the other end of the spectrum, in terms of loss-making enterprises, Sri Lankan Airlines lost 75 billion or thereabouts, which is only about half as much as it lost the previous year, but still a huge amount of money. Sri Lankan Airlines' total debt at this moment stands at more than 500 billion rupees. It's a massive loss-making enterprise, and politicians can't seem to decide whether to shut it down, privatize it, or sell it to someone. They argue amongst themselves, and no decision has been made. So the airline continues to bleed $1.5 billion rupees a week. And then at the same time, the simple things that government could have done. Stopped land grabbing by politicians and influential people. We've seen newspaper reports almost every week of people grabbing land, the little state land that remains. Environmental performance, on the other hand, 1,300 elephants, wild elephants, killed since 2019 in the past 5 years. This is crazy. 5 elephants are slaughtered every week. What kind of environmental governance do we have in the country? So even the easy things haven't been addressed by the government, which is a shame.
Well, 2024 is not going to be a cakewalk. How is the year looking?
Well, I think we'll keep stonewalling our creditors. We owe them a lot of money, $50 billion, and we're not paying a cent. We haven't paid a cent for the last 20 months, in effect. And I think the government's been very crafty and clever about putting them off. I suspect Ranil Wickremesinghe will try to put them off until after the presidential election next year, so that we don't have to start dwindling our pittance of a foreign exchange reserve. At the same time, the Treasury is already estimating that we will have a deficit of 3 trillion rupees next year. This is crazy. And the president says that we are going to be paying about that much again in debt servicing next year. Of course, half of that goes in local debt servicing, but the rest of it he hopes to pay to our overseas creditors. I don't think that's going to happen. Central bank reserve at the moment is only $3.6 billion. It's been that much for the past several months. It doesn't look like we can build up a reserve to start servicing debt anytime soon. So we're going to continue in this bankrupt situation for at least another year by the looks of it, whatever anyone says. In an election year, I can't see the government starting to service debt. Where's the money going to come from? So next year is, I think, going to be dominated by the presidential election. The big question is whether the parties, the SJB, the UNP, the SLPP, the minority parties, whether they can all group together in some form with a coalition either with the NPP or against the NPP. And I think for the first time in presidential election history next year, we're going to see no party getting 50% of the vote. Policy-wise,
Where are we going to see change?
No, it's too late for policy. You see, in the tail end of a government, the election will be announced at latest by the end of September next year. So the government's only got 9 months of the year to get anything done. Policy is a much longer time frame, or it needs a much longer time frame to get policies done. So I suspect that next year is going to be basically just holding the fort, giving out some sweets to the electorate to keep people happy, to buy some votes come the election, depending on how the political parties turn up. And then towards the end of the year, I suspect the government will start printing money, whatever they say now, so that they can give out more largesse, give government jobs, give whatever it takes to try and win an election. Fitch has made a prediction that prices will rise by about 9% in 2024. But if the government prints money and devalues the rupee, all bets are off. So it could be quite a difficult year in terms of economic policy as well.
You mentioned the presidential election. Do you see the voter being older and wiser?
Well, certainly the voter is older, but I don't think anyone's much the wiser. No, and it doesn't really depend on the voter. Regardless of which party you elect, you have the same problem, the 3 trillion rupee deficit, which you really can't erase. You know, people say we can raise taxes or collect more taxes, but even if you collect all the taxes that are due to government, every single last cent, and you cannot meet this huge deficit. Our pay tax is enough barely to meet Sri Lankan Airlines' loss for the year. So when you come to defense, to education, to health, and this enormous public service that Sri Lanka has, you have the problem that you cannot really pay for it from tax revenues. Tax revenues are just about enough to service our debt, about 1.5 trillion rupees a year, tax and customs duty and all government revenue. So basically, this is going to continue. It doesn't depend on a government. Whichever government comes into office, you have the same problem.
So what does this do to the poor?
The poor are going to get more and more stressed, but the poor have always been with us. And I think our job is to provide the best possible safety net we can through food relief and through some kind of, I don't like to use the word dole, but a system where everybody is assured of a minimum basic income to keep the wolf from the door. And at these times, it's even more difficult for people on low incomes or no incomes because of healthcare. Healthcare is becoming very difficult and inefficient in the government sector because the health ministry is starved for funds. And so people are increasingly having to seek healthcare in the private sector, which is really expensive. So I think the poor are being really squeezed in this situation. It translates into social unrest at some point, but there's no easy fix for this, which is very sad.
What industries do you see succeeding as we move into 2024?
This is a tough one because I suspect tourism is the thing that we should really focus on. Tourism arrivals doubled this year compared with last year, and we're all hoping it will double again next year. But the problem is next year is an election year, and election years are always unstable. And then to add to that, 2025 is going to be an election year as well, and that election will probably be declared around the peak of the tourist season at the end of next year. So we are looking at a politically turbulent country, at least until the middle of 2025. And so tourism is unlikely to respond positively in that environment. At the same time, we're looking at more money printing, as I said, and possible devaluation in case we are forced to start servicing overseas debt by our creditors. And so next year could become a very difficult year in every sense of the word. The other thing also to remember in the final year of every government is that the public service begins like working to rule. They go on strike and they become very inefficient. When I say go on strike, I don't mean like unions go on strike. Public servants just down tools and stop working efficiently. And so that slows the government down as well. So going into September next year, I think you'll see the government becoming increasingly paralyzed in terms of the flexibility to respond to challenges. And this will mean that we slow the country down until the new administration takes off in 2025. But that's a long way off.
So you're painting a very dismal picture.
If you go back to 1953, the year of our first major deficit, and every year since, the last 70 years, we've had a deficit. What's the point of painting a rosy picture? We've performed badly, and the likelihood is that we'll continue to perform badly. We don't suddenly wake up tomorrow morning and think we've got new thoughts. So I think it's better to be realistic than to be foolishly optimistic, because then you don't realize anything.
In a nutshell, what are the do's and don'ts for 2024?
I suspect on every mother's mind, the biggest do for her children is get out of the country, is emigrate. More and more people are just getting on the first plane they can, going to whichever country they can, and getting themselves a job. Sadly, that is the reality. We're turning out graduates now to go and work in other countries. The cream of our intellectual capital is being whittled away to the West. I think the big don't, at least the advice that I've given myself, is don't keep your savings in the bank or in financial institutions next year, especially if that's all you've got by way of savings. It's much better to buy inflation-proof assets like land. So the big don't, I'd say, is don't keep cash around, because inflation is going to really eat into it going into 2025.
If you like Kaleidoscope, don't forget to subscribe, like and follow us. We are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn.